Well, good evening, friends, and my fellow West Texans. Jodey here. Thank you for taking the time to join me here at the end of this wild and woolly year, unpredictable, unprecedented, and there's lots to talk about, and I'm going to do something that I don't do often, and that is I'm not going to give a long intro. Partly because my staff told me, don't be talking too much, let them talk. And I guess I should just say thank you. So if you don't hear anything else, or if you get, or your dog trips over the internet connection and you lose me, know that I am so deeply honored to be your voice in our nation's capital. And I love West Texas. I'm so proud of what West Texas has done for me, and being raised there, and with the values of the people of West Texas, and the food, fuel, and fiber capital of the world, the food security, the energy independence, making the wheels turn on this economy, and just being part of rural America, which is the backbone, I think, of this country, and the bedrock traditional American values. So I'm loud and proud for you up here, and like you, and part of the values of West Texas is the fact that we love our country, and we want our country to win, and we put our country before our personal interest, our partisan interest, and I hope that that's something that I represent here in the swamp. We got to change the culture of this place if we're ever going to continue this great experiment in liberty and democracy. So God bless West Texas, and God have mercy on our country, and may we move forward into the future with greater hope and prosperity and opportunities and freedom for our children. That's my mission, and I'm on mission every day for you. So, hey, listen, press *3 if you have a question. *3 will get you in the queue. I'm going to try to get to just as many as we can. And then I also want you to know we have a newsletter, and we send it out regularly. I think it's weekly. It could be every couple of weeks. But it just keeps you apprised of what's going on up here. We give lots of detail with respect to the positions I'm taking, and give you at least my one West Texans perspective on how things are developing on some of the big issues facing our country. So speaking of big issues and the challenges that we've faced over the last year, since this is kind of a year in review, let's remember also that there's been a blessing in all of this darkness, and the blessing is, we've spent more time with family, more than likely. We appreciate our teachers. I know my wife and I do, because we had to do their job for, a couple of months in the spring, like a lot of people who have children, school-age children, and I don't know how teachers have the patience. And I love my kids unconditionally, but so thank you, teachers. God bless you for what you do to help train up and educate and empower the next generation of West Texans, including my own children. Also, the healthcare workers, we take for granted that we've got some of the best healthcare infrastructure in all of the country right there in the hub city and in West Texas. So those guys I know are weary. I know you talk about COVID fatigue. We can't even say that word, because we don't fully appreciate what they've been having to do 24/7, full alert, trying to save lives and risking theirs in the process. So, again, lots to be thankful for. We learned about China and our dependency on them, and the national security issue that is for our country. And we've learned how to use technology to save lives, telemedicine. There's just a number of things that I think you can look back on and say, we're going to be better and stronger and safer and healthier learning the lessons from this experience. But I know you've got a lot on your mind, so let's get to the questions, and we appreciate you joining us tonight. One last shout out. I have a colleague that's been with me for almost 3 years, Jessica Weiner, and she's from San Antonio, and she's been my communications right hand. She's the one that hosts these things from a technology standpoint. She's been the voice behind the voice for West Texas, and we're going to miss her a lot. She's moving up to bigger responsibility and more influence, and I promise you, she may be from San Antonio, but she went to Texas Tech, and she is crazy about West Texas, absolutely crazy about it. So anyway, we're going to miss you, Jessica, and I know the folks in West Texas will miss your presence. Okay, *3 for questions, *6 to get our newsletter. Let's start with Daniel, and he's online, so we don't know where Daniel is sending us his question from. But Daniel, thank you. He says, how soon will Congress approve a bill that provides COVID payments to individuals? Well, that's being ferreted out as we speak, and I hope we can get something done tomorrow. The funding for the government runs out Saturday, which is no surprise. Our budgeting process is completely broken up here. Nobody could run a business or your own homes the way Congress is run. I'm sad to report, and I can talk to you about a number of things I'm doing on your behalf on that front, but that wasn't the question. Part of the COVID relief legislation, which is roughly just under $1 trillion, down by $3 trillion from what Pelosi introduced, which was a fantasy document. I think, quite frankly, and I don't mean to be too partisan, but it was a leftist, socialist fantasy document, and I can be specific, but I will move on. The next one was $2.5 trillion. So we're now down under $1 trillion, about, let's say, $900 billion. The key components of that are the Paycheck Protection Program, which has been a lifeline of small businesses, and has not just helped them keep the lights on, but it has helped them keep their employees on the payroll instead of on unemployment. It's been a tremendous success, and unfortunately, we've had $150 billion or $140 just sitting in abeyance. We appropriated it, but it isn't working to help our fellow Americans. So that's got to be, and I believe it will be in the final package. There is talk about two things to help individuals and families. I do think we have to help those who are still struggling, and there are some, especially who come out of businesses and industries that have been hit the hardest. One of those provisions is enhanced unemployment. I think, screwed up the first time, and I think the intentions were good, but we actually increased unemployment insurance by $600 a week. Now, the road to bad places is paved with good intentions. Here's what the outcome was. We were paying 85 to 90% of the people on unemployment more than they made at their previous job. So we were hurting ourselves in terms of recovery, even though we were trying to help families. So here's what folks have proposed. We cut that in half and say $300 a week. That's enhanced unemployment. And then you have what people call stimulus checks. I don't even like calling them stimulus checks. I call them direct assistance payments. We sent out those direct assistance to the tune of $1,200 to every American under a certain threshold of income. We need to target that to those who are most in need of it this round. So my interest is, let's get some support to the people who need it, but let's not give checks to everybody. I had folks in my office who got those checks, but they weren't losing their jobs, and they didn't need them. I mean, they wanted them. I'm sure they didn't give them back, but It's not. We are $27 trillion in debt. You want to talk about a crisis? That's the one you can't bail out of. So we've got to do the right thing by providing temporary and targeted assistance and relief to our fellow Americans. It is in there, but it's reduced significantly from 1,200. What I would do personally is not enhance unemployment and create a disincentive for work, but I would plus up the direct assistance and then target it to the people who need it the most. That's just a little outline, if you will, of some of the main things in the COVID relief package. Thank you, Daniel. Let's go on to the next question. I'm sure a lot of people had that question, and we are pushing hard to get that out this week so you can go into Christmas with some of that support and assistance. And nobody could have planned what has happened as a result of COVID. Little side note, though, it's not just COVID. It's the government's response to it that has been, I think, equally devastating to the lives of fellow Americans. Look, we got to take common sense, precautionary measures. But I don't believe in federal mandates. I don't believe in one size fits all. I believe local communities with their local leaders can work to find the right balance. But we can't shut schools down and keep our kids out of school. Disastrous. And we can't shut our economy down. People got to make a living. Valerie from Big Spring, how we doing in Big Spring, America?
I'm doing okay, trying to work on my book. I have a question for you. I visited some friends up in Kansas City and in Missouri also, and I'm concerned about the Black Lives Matter riots that's going on. What is your view on that? And are you afraid they'll come to Texas?
Well, I don't. I oppose the Black Lives Matter organization. I'm for Black lives, brown lives, white lives. I'm for American people having their fundamental God-given rights protected. I'm for peaceful protests. I'm not for Antifa and radical groups of any political persuasion running roughshod over our peaceful communities and law-abiding citizens. I mean, what we've witnessed up until this election has been domestic terrorism. They've terrorized our communities, and local leaders have laid down and completely abdicated their first job, which is to protect their citizens. I'd say worse of all, Valerie, you have rogue prosecutors like the one in Missouri that instead of going after the bad guys that are trying to burn down our taxpayer-funded property and assault law enforcement officers by throwing bricks at them and Molotov cocktails and shooting commercial-grade fireworks off in their faces, instead of going after those guys, they're prosecuting people for exercising their Second Amendment right to protect themselves, their property, and their family. That is unconscionable, un-American, and I've been working with Bill Barr as AG to go after those folks, what I call rogue prosecutors. And I think we've been probably the loudest voice in Congress. And in fact, we introduced 2 pieces of legislation and a resolution to increase the punishment for assaulting a federal police officer or law enforcement officer. We named it after Patrick Underwood, who is a law enforcement officer who was killed in riots in Oakland. And then we named another one after David Dorn. We asked his wife if we could honor him in that way, and that was increasing the penalty for rioting. So, I feel like on behalf of West Texas, and I know we believe in law and order, and I know we believe in the right for peaceful protest, but I know we're not going to let radical domestic terrorist groups come into our community and and trample our rights. I think there's a reason you haven't seen this in Texas like you have in Portland, Oregon, and other places like Seattle, Washington. Valerie, thank you for your question. I feel very strongly about it, and I tell you, we've taken action. We were the first ones to file legislation in that regard, and we got a bunch of people on it. Maybe one day we'll get some Democrats to join us, and we'll actually pass it. Jerry Reynolds from Brownfield, a great capital of the world, growing some peanuts and cotton out there too. Terry County, I love you guys. Jerry, what's going on? How can I address your concerns?
Hello. Thanks for having me on. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Good.
Okay,
thanks
great.
for calling in.
I'm a Brownfield resident, Terry County. I manage Tokyo Co-op Gin in Yoakum County, so I'm in agriculture, and I have a wife that teaches in Plains, so we're kind of scattered all over a couple of counties there. Anyway, just, there's lots of crazy stuff going on right now and lots of uncertainty of everything. One of my main concerns is where we still stand with election results for the presidency. I know the Electoral College has been certified, and we're kind of on track to this thing not going the direction we would hope for President Trump to be retained. But do you see any recourse left in possibilities as far as pursuing some of these fraudulent election concerns? Is there legitimacy to that in your mind? And if so, who's going to investigate it and what can be done about it? And I know you can only speak for yourself from this standpoint, but I just don't feel like there's enough Republican backing for Trump in this realm. To me, those guys need to be standing beside him in Washington, because if we lose the presidency race and we lose the Senate race in Georgia, it's going to get pretty rough, and you know that. I just want to get your take on those couple of things. Also, the earlier mentioned questions about the relief. I have no problem with whatever relief you guys can come up with, but I think the ultimate thing is we need to get businesses back open 100%. So people can have their jobs back, and so people can make their businesses and make their payroll and all. I mean, we've overreacted. I'm not making light of the illnesses or deaths from COVID, but at the end of the day, it's turned out that the deaths and the illness rate is no different than the flu. I just feel like it's been politicized so much. We got to get our country back on track. You know what I'm saying? And that would take care of a lot of these issues, people not having jobs, and the overpayment of unemployment doesn't give them any incentive to come back, especially in the agricultural field. I had a hard time even filling a crew this year. And then lastly, I'll leave it with just what are your thoughts on trying to get a better immigration program, whether it be a temporary or permanent, to get seasonal workers for agriculture or oil field or other businesses in our region?
Jerry, I love my God-fearing, freedom-loving Terry County folk, because y'all just make too much sense. But you come up here and you just wonder where it all goes. You just
right.
seem to lose it. You seem to lose it, on the way up, and until you get to D.C. and you feel like you got none left. But I look, there's a longer answer, and look, your question is probably one that's burning a hole in the hearts of many who are on this call. So let me take some time to talk about the election and the electoral process. I'm very concerned about the changes that were made wholesale across the country in many of the states of these United States. The changes were such that they were incredibly irresponsible, and they were just wide open for abuse, corruption, human error, fraud, wide open for it. I mean, we have to have some basic standards for the very process that holds up our democratic republic. Like this democracy and the consent to be governed by our federal government as a United States, it all hinges on a fair, open, and accurate election. And I think that when the changes were made, Jerry, from day one, and the president expressed concern early on, he said this is going to be a disaster. Well, guess what? This has been a disaster. And no matter how it turns out, no matter what the final outcome is, you have millions of people that do not believe it was legitimate, and it's going to be that much harder to get our country together. It's going to be harder to govern our country, and it's going to be hard to unite our country. So now, that's just the changes that were made. Then you have questions of who made those changes. Now, I signed an amicus brief that some folks had a problem with, but I will tell you the amicus brief, which attached to the petition that was filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and many, many other states joined him. Our amicus brief was very targeted. It didn't support every claim he had in his petition. I don't think I would agree with every claim in his petition. But our focus was Article 2 of the Constitution, which gives the sole authority to make and change election laws to the state legislatures, people elected by the will of the people, not by secretaries of state, not by the courts, not by any other entity or person. And we know that happened in Pennsylvania. We know it happened in Wisconsin, Michigan, and other places. Whether that overturns the election or not is secondary. My first responsibility is to uphold the Constitution and the rule of law. And we're watching that play out today with the claims that have been made at various levels of the courts. And there are some questions for the highest court, which is the application of Article 2. Now, I will readily concede many of the claims have been dismissed and thrown out. And I think it's a narrow shot that something that there is some evidence of widespread fraud. I hear about it. I believe that there's a tremendous amount of gaming going on, and it's a shoddy election infrastructure because of the changes in laws. But you've got to present that evidence to the courts, and the highest court in the land has to take that up and make and render a judgment on it. I'm not going to make a decision until the electoral votes are counted by the People's House and the United States Senate. And at that time, I want this process to be fully exhausted. I want every claim to be heard. And I think when you witness the irregularities, the oddities, the causes for concern like poll watchers not getting to observe and suitcases of votes coming in, ballots coming in after the fact. And when you saw, one candidate up by a large volume of votes on election night, and then weeks later it changes dramatically. When Texas and Florida can count their votes in one night on election night, so this thing is upside down. We can never allow it to happen again, and I'm allowing the process to work its way out fully and completely before I make a decision. But we can't keep this posture forever, and we've got to move on as a country. And one good news, if you're a Republican and a conservative, and I'd say I'm a conservative before being a Republican, just like I'd say I'm a Christian before I'm a conservative. 14 seats in the United States House flipped from Democrat to Republican. We didn't lose across the United States a single Republican incumbent. We have the narrowest margin for Speaker Pelosi and any party in Speaker since World War II. People have rejected, the American people have roundly rejected the obstruction that came from the Pelosi House, the extreme leftist policies, and identity politics. I think they rejected them wholesale. And I believe they are believing in the conservative principles and values that I think are primarily espoused by West Texans and they're the traditional values that made our country great. I hope that explains a little bit of my position on the election. There are a number of those claims. Let's let them work through the courts. Let's let the process play out, and then January 6th, we're going to have to make a decision, and I'll let you know with the evidence and information at that time what it'll be. Jerry, thank you. God bless you, and thanks for your comments and your question. If you have a question, again, star 3. If you want to get on that newsletter and stay engaged and informed as to what we're doing and what positions we're taking on your behalf, what we think about some of these issues as they develop, please join us by hitting star 6. We'd love to have you engaged. The more, the better. Hey, we got a quick, so we've got a few survey questions for tonight, but this is the first one. Do you trust the presidential election to be fair and accurate? This is a perfect time to ask this on the heels of Jerry's question. I'm going to ask it again, and I'm going to tell you what you do to answer it. Do you trust the presidential election as fair and accurate? Press 1 if you think it was fair and accurate. Press 2 if you don't. Okay? Press 1 if you think it was fair and accurate, this presidential election. Press 2 if you don't. Okay, let's go back to the questions, and we got Darnell Thomas from the Hub City, home of Buddy Holly. Darnell.
How you doing? How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for calling in.
Oh, I loved it. What I was calling, I ain't going to keep you long. What I'm dealing with is PTSD on our war hero. I've got a war hero that's highly decorated, and he's been back here, and he's not himself. A parent knows their child. I'm a dad, and I know my son. And I want to know, is there a way that you can talk to VA to give us permission to talk for our kids that's been over there and that's got hurt? There's several. I've been a law officer for 8 years, and on top of that, I've dealt with a bunch of these guys. And they can't speak for themselves. We've got to speak for them because the doctors don't understand. They can go in and tell the doctor one thing, and it's totally, totally way off of what is happening. I've dealt with the judges on it and everything, and we don't have a way of helping them if we can't speak up for our own children. Does that make any sense?
Man, it makes too much sense, and it's a beautiful thing to hear from a dad that cares about his son and an American that cares about those that we train to be part of the greatest fighting force in the world, and then go fight for our freedom and our security, and then they come home, and you know what? The character of our country, it can be measured on how we treat our veterans. And so
exactly.
let me and listen, Darnell, we got a different set of challenges than we have with past war heroes. For some reason, the mental health challenges, the wounds you can't see, are the ones that are killing our kids and our sons and daughters that come back.
Amen to that.
So let me just tell you let me get real practical with you, and then let me give you just a quick little philosophical and something we've done just recently I think you'll be very proud of. So the most practical thing I can tell you is you need to call 806-763-1611. You need to call 806-763-1611. There's a young lady named Mackenzie, and she is dynamo. And we get about 600 cases a year of people who can't get their Social Security check, they can't get in the VA hospital or other VA-related issues, just a number of issues as they interface with this big, unwieldy bureaucracy that we have as a federal government. It's just not very responsive to its citizens. So I want you to call and ask for Mackenzie, and I'm going to send her a note, and we're going to do everything we can to help the people you've mentioned that you're concerned about with respect to PTSD and how we can get them into the VA system. So Darnell, we promise we'll do everything we can to help. We're often successful. About 65% of the time, we are successful for our people. But let's give it a good try.
Can you give me that number one more time?
806.
Okay.
The local number in Lubbock. 806-763.
Okay.
1611.
I got it that time.
Okay. Hey, you bet.
Thank you.
Hey, listen, here's the other thing that we are excited about, and we just celebrated it last night, so it's a perfect timing. I've been working for 3 years on a bill. When I was on the VA committee, I chaired a subcommittee, and we worked on some things like the post-9/11 GI Bill and the VA Accountability Act, where you could hold the VA bureaucrats accountable when they're not serving our veterans, fire them if they're not willing to do the job to help our veterans, all that stuff. But one of the things which was the thing that it became very personal for me, was the Transition Assistance Improvement Act. Now, it sounds very federal government, with in its terminology, but let me break it down. When people come out of active duty military, there's a program that should engage them and assess their mental health, their physical health, their education. Their education needs, their job training needs. Basically, it's trying to help them transition to being a civilian and making sure that they're as productive and that we maximize their God-given gifts and their experiences as a leader in the military. What's happened is that program has not worked for our veterans, and we found ways to beef it up and I think make it work where it's going to save lives. It's named after a West Texan who I went to high school with, and he was Mr. All-American, G.I. Joe. I mean, he was the epitome of an American warrior. His name was Bill Mulder, and unfortunately, Darnell, he took his own life, man. He got eaten up with the PTSD and stuff like you're talking about. And had we had folks, I think, come around him and find out what his condition was, and had we connected him back with the veteran, his brothers and sisters who wore the uniform, and programs locally, not run by the government, but some of these programs that we have locally, I don't know. Maybe we could have saved him, but
his life, exactly.
There you go. So it's the Bill Mulder. It's named in honor of him, Chief Petty Officer, Navy SEAL, Bill Mulder. I love saying it because there's going to be some Bill Mulders and families like his.
I've got one. I have got one. He's been over there 8 years, and I've got judges as friends, but their hands are tied. And I said, we got to do something. We can't sit here and do nothing. They need help, and we've got to get it somehow. But I appreciate this number, and I will speak to her. I promise you that.
Well, Darnell, God bless you, and your kids, and everyone that wears a uniform and risks it all for the things that we're talking about here tonight. We can talk about election security. We can talk about integrity of the electoral process, the Constitution. You know what? That's great. We should debate it. I want to fight to uphold it. But you know what? There are people that are literally today taking bullets and shrapnel for the fact that we can have this conversation. And for this great country. So thanks, Darnell. Next question, Jamie Herron. And sorry, Jamie, if I mispronounce your last name.
It's all right. Jamie Herron.
Jamie Herron, looky there. Every now and then a Plainview boy gets it right.
Albany, Texas. We've met several times.
Well, Jamie, tell me what is on your mind or on your heart that we can talk about.
Well, what's on my mind and my heart is I hope that I live long enough to be able to elect you for President of the United States.
You you wouldn't want to do that to somebody you cared about. You must not like me.
Oh, I like you too much. That's why
Well,
I think you would be the voice of the people.
you are too
Office.
sweet, Jamie. And listen, between you and my mom and my wife and maybe one of my 3 kids, when they're old enough to vote, I might be able to, at least stay in this job. I appreciate that. And listen, nothing makes me happier than to know that somebody out there in West Texas feels like I am their voice, and that we are standing on the principles that you believe in, and we're trying to advance the policies that you think are good and right for our country. So it blesses me that you would tell me that. And as a guy who feels...
we need an honest politician. And for some reason, you strike me as that kind of a man.
Well, Jamie, you made my night. Are you sure that's not you, Mom? Mom? I'm
No,
kidding.
it's not your mama. But I have met your beautiful wife, and I have met your 3 lovely children. And I don't know, you just strike me as the kind of politician that we're proud to have up there and that we need at the tip top.
Well, I'm honored, I'm flattered, and I appreciate you made my night. You made my night. I'm gonna have to. Hey, if my mom calls in, just tell her she doesn't need to say anything. I've already heard from. I've heard from Jamie. Jamie, we love you. We appreciate you. Thanks for letting me do this on your behalf. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jody.
Let's go to a question, a survey question. We get these back, and they're so interesting. I need to start reporting the last survey we took every time we do a new tele-town hall. But this question is, what do you think the most important issue is heading into 2021? Man, there are lots of issues. We've listed a handful here. Press 1. Now listen to all these first. Press 1 if you think it's confronting China. A lot of threats, a lot of dimensions to China. Press 2 if you think it's securing our elections now and going forward, and especially going forward. Press 3 if you think it's reforming big tech censorship and the threat to our freedom of speech, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a threat to democracy. Press 4 if it's reopening our country. So lots of big ones there. So let's do it one more time. The biggest challenge, most important issue that you want me to prioritize in 2021, if you think it's China, press 1. If you think it's election security, press 2. If you think it's big tech censorship, press 3. And if you think it's reopening the country, press 4. Remember, star 6 if you want to get on that e-newsletter. I think you'll appreciate it. I hear from a lot of my friends and constituents back home that they appreciate. They may not agree with me on everything, but they sure appreciate being kept up to speed on what we're doing. Can't please everybody all the time, my dad used to tell me. So we're just trying to do what we think's right. Mr. Wes Baird from Big Spring. Man, Big Spring's active tonight. Big Spring, I like to say, is the intersection, the almost the perfect intersection between ag and energy. The food, fuel, and fiber epicenter may be right there in Big Spring, America. So, Wes, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, my question was this Biden's proposed gun bill where it's going to strip a lot of rights from people that just can't afford the taxes that will be imposed on semi-automatic weapons. Because the way it's read, if you own any semi-automatic weapon that has the capacity to accept a box magazine, then somebody out there somewhere makes a magazine that holds more than 10 rounds. That'll automatically be listed as an NFA item and then that would be a $200 tax for the gun, and then a $200 tax for every magazine. So if you buy a 9mm Beretta that holds more than 10 rounds, it's $600 in taxes before you can buy a $300 gun. And that just, there's lots of people wouldn't be able to afford it, and they would strip them away. And how can the government take millions of firearms from somebody? You know, I mean, it's just passive disarmament.
You said it better than I could, Wes. I'm locked in with you 100%. See, the Constitution is pretty clear about the rights and the freedoms that were endowed to us not by our government, but by our Creator. And that the first job of the government, after providing for the common defense, is to protect those rights and freedoms. You know, we've made government everything to everybody, and we've bankrupted, and we're gonna heap a whole lot of debt on the backs of our kids as a result. But one thing's for sure, Wes, the federal government's job, if you really get back to its constitutional mission, is to make sure that you can speak truth to power without fear of being imprisoned by your government like they do in Iran and other countries, China, where you can go worship freely God and without the fear of reprisal from your government. And by golly, you should be able to bear arms without the infringement of the federal government. That's the clear language. The federal government shall not infringe on our right to keep and bear arms. And you know what? How anyone could, and by the way, taxing like that is an infringement. It's a de facto ban. It's a de facto restriction that goes beyond the pale for restricting a fundamental freedom and basic human right. Those Bill of Rights have the highest standard and threshold before you can restrict or regulate, and that's just a backdoor way to ban our use of firearms. On the heels, by the way, on the heels of every American watching as criminals have trespassed and trampled the rights of our citizens in places like Portland and cities across the country, and you want to tell me you want to try to infringe on our ability to protect ourselves? Remember this. This is my belief. The founders didn't put that Second Amendment in there for the right to go hunting and for sportsmanship. Now that's fine and good. I love to hunt like anyone else. And you know what? It's not even the old English common law of self-defense. It was in there as the last check on tyranny. And so we wouldn't be Americans, we wouldn't have our independence, and we wouldn't be the greatest beacon of freedom the world has ever known if it weren't for the right to keep and bear arms. So thanks, Wes. And Wes, we got to win those Senate races in Georgia, or it's going to get real ugly fast on these issues. Because, last point, I think President Biden, if he should be elected, and if this plays out that way, a Biden-Harris administration would, I think you're going to see, it's going to be similar to a third year of Obama in terms of the activism from the executive branch, regulatory activism, and lots of executive orders. As Kamala Harris said, and we should believe her, if we don't have a gun control measure out of Congress in the first 100 days, I'm going to do it through executive order. Thank God President Trump, who I supported every step of the way and still support, put great judges who respect the Constitution and the law of the land, and that's going to be our our biggest backstop. Thanks, Wes. Sorry to ramble on. Miss Brenda Walker from Haskell, USA.
Hello?
Brenda?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Brenda. Jodey here.
Yes.
Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
What's on your heart?
I have a question, and I don't know if you can answer this. Okay. We have China trying to infiltrate in all of the United States. Is there any way that Texas and each state have an investigation into who is receiving money from China and why? Because each of our politicians come from one of these states, and a lot of them have lined their pockets. And that is why we are messed up on this election, too, I believe, and everything. And so I was wondering if there's any way that an investigation can be done legally to find out who is receiving money, what companies, and why, and just to investigate it to make sure there is nothing like Hunter Biden stuff going on.
Well, Brenda, we learned after the election, conveniently for, I guess, some,
yes.
that Hunter Biden was being investigated, and and it's no small thing, I think, to reach the threshold of evidence to be investigated by the Department of Justice. It wasn't a political thing, like the Russia collusion, which was a completely political thing.
Yes.
And I don't delight in people's struggles and all, but if there's any collusion going on with any foreign country, and if there's any interference going on with our elected officials and their ability to put their country's interests first, and to not, or to, and to be conflicted, then, and there's evidence of that, we absolutely should investigate it.
Yeah, they've come up that there was foreign interference. They have. Yeah. Said
well, there's foreign interference. Let me tell you, in just about every election. Number one, I mean, Russia's going to interfere to every extent
I
that they can.
They investigated now before any other elections come up.
Well,
that they might can nip it before it happens again.
Well, we put a lot of your tax money to harden our elections to prevent some of the potential disruption and compromise that could result from what Russia primarily does, but others do it too. I mean, China's got a lot of things going on that should concern us, and China's very complicated. Starting with this pandemic and their incompetency and corruption and cover-up, and what they've
sorry, I believe that was an intentional, and that's my view.
Well, intentional or not, and whether they were doing research to consider things in the future in terms of biological weapons, regardless, they should be held accountable. And the other issue there with China is, and this is something in our control completely, we have too much of our supply chain embedded in the People's Republic of China. And it wouldn't matter if it was a sole source provider in any country, because you don't want to depend on another nation for things that are important to your citizens' safety and security, but especially China. So we've got a lot of work to do there on that thread. I'm glad you brought it up, Brenda. It's at the top of my list, and I believe, I will say this, I think even many of my Democrat friends are equally concerned and exercised about the threats of communist China. So thanks, Brenda. Mr. Greg Goza, I believe, from just outside of Abilene, Texas, the big country. Greg, are you with us?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I just have a couple of comments, and I say I agree with what you said about the VA. I say kudos to the VA and the increase and the better stuff they're doing there. But one thing I would like to say is I think that something needs to be put into play where the and I'm sorry, you may not like this, but the representatives or the senators' pay, if they figure out some way to cut their pay until they get some of this stuff done, like, for instance, on the Covet bill, then I think that they would get that passed pretty quick, and that goes along with our budget process too. And so that's number one. And number two is that election fraud is number one. I'd say that's number one, but we're not taking another survey. But anyway, but also I just think you ought to stick with Trump till the end, or even past the end, and do what you have to do there. But man, that election fraud makes me sick at my stomach, and they're going to bring on a war if they don't watch it. If they can't protect our Constitution, then you're going to see a war rise up, and I don't know how they're going to do it, but I think they better take fear of it, take fear of that.
Greg, you sound like a lot of my fellow West Texans who are just beside themselves on account of this election. And I said this to the news media locally the other day. You have to be the most naive person on the planet not to think that there wasn't something awry with this election. Now, there are lots of ways to address that. I know the courts are working. These things are working their way through the courts. And, you got to let it play out. That's part of our democracy. That's part of our rule of law. And I'm with you. If I wasn't suspect, and if I wasn't deeply concerned, I wouldn't have written letters to AG Barr saying we've got to investigate these irregularities, these allegations of fraud. I wouldn't have signed on to all these other measures. I've been trying to fight every step of the way, Greg, and I'm going to continue to fight. And now, just let me say this. You are so right, and I wish to goodness we could figure out how to write this into law. But the thing that frustrates me, and I say it all the time, Greg, while we can give information and we can give recommendations, we need to respect people's freedoms. And, Dr. Fauci and other bureaucrats and politicians, you might as well put me in the mix, because we're getting our pay whether we open up the economy or not, and whether we get a next COVID relief, when people are actually struggling just to survive, and not just as a business. They're worried about feeding their families. We're going into Christmas, and some folks, suicide, mental health, addiction, the things that we're seeing increase, we're going to inherit the whirlwind. And we got folks up here telling me I got to wear a mask on the House floor when they're in the soul around me for 100 feet. And they just don't. I'm not against wearing. Listen, I'm not against wearing masks when people feel like that's helpful. I'm not against. I'm for hygiene. I'm for distancing. I'm for taking extra precaution if you're vulnerable and you're older and you're sicker. But man, Greg, you got it right. If we took a hit when we couldn't produce. And I've got some of this on passing budgets, but if we couldn't produce and if we shut the economy down, then we take a pay cut. Listen, brother, you wouldn't you wouldn't hear a peep from the federal government. We would get things done, and you wouldn't have any of these crazy federal mandates that they're talking about. So I'm with you. And by the way, I'm the chair of the bipartisan caucus for term limits, and got the president's endorsement of my term limit bill. And I think that's another one of those things where we won't see the culture of Washington change until we stop allowing for people to be up here for a career. That's not what our founders expected. They wanted us to serve and then go back to the farm and live under the laws that we passed. Greg, thank you. Appreciate you. We got our final survey question. Do you believe the vaccine for COVID-19 is safe? Very important question. The vaccines have just hit the market a week ago, and now we just heard that Moderna's vaccine, along now with Pfizer, is in the marketplace, and we should get about 1.5 million doses by the end of this month, and we'll have 100 million doses out there in across the country by the end of January or February. I think February. So, by the way, give President Trump his due on a number of things, but this is one of them. Nobody cut through the red tape and bureaucracy like this guy. Nobody. H1N1 was the last pandemic or disease outbreak. It took 5 years. 5 years to get a vaccine. This president, through Operation Warp Speed, figured out how to unleash the power of innovation and accelerated that in 11 months. We've got a vaccine. I think that's incredible, and just add that to the many things on the list of the historic accomplishments of Donald J. Trump. Okay, the question is, do you believe the vaccine for COVID-19 is safe? Press 1 if you think it is. Yes. Press 2 if you don't. That'd be no. Do you believe the vaccine for COVID-19 is safe? Press 1 for yes. Press 2 for no. Well, Greg got me all spun up with his, I'm kidding, Greg. I agree with you. Okay, let's go to the last question. Maybe we get a question or two in, but Miss Brenda Martin from Lubbock, Texas.
Yes.
Hi, Brenda.
Hi. I'm also born and raised in Plainview, so we have that in common, and we really appreciate it.
You better be nice to me now, because
all right, I'll try.
We're Bulldog Nation.
Yeah, that's right. I appreciate you bringing up term limits. When we have people like Nancy Pelosi that have been there 47 plus years, it's ridiculous. We have to have it. Other people that are good, we would like them to be there a long time. But people like her, no, we just can't have it. And another thing is that I'm really upset about is this election. We've talked about how it seemed to be so actually from the Chinese point of view. And I don't know if we could redo it. It's so crooked and so bad that it seems almost like we should have another one, and it has to be by paper, and people have to show up. So those little machines were changing things in the middle of the night. So something's got to be done to fix our elections. Another thing that I'm really worried about, I was a teacher, and I feel like the teachers or the curriculum, something's going on because the children are not learning about our freedoms being gone. And when you see even teachers were in Portland, with this Antifa stuff, and I'm just going, what is wrong? People have lost their minds. Teachers are not teaching, parents are not teaching, or there's a disconnect, and I'm really worried about that. And so anyway, I have several things, and I get on Facebook and I hear things about how Joe Biden was bought by China. Some of that I believe. And we need to keep our country free, not have socialism, then next is communism, and why he and his son are not being investigated and for trading or being traitors for our country, I don't know. But I think that's a step in the right direction. So anyway, I have several concerns.
Well, you sound like a good Plainview Bulldog to me, and I'm with you. I'm deeply concerned, and I grieve. I grieve for my country because of what's happened in this past election. It didn't have to be that way. California changed their election laws to look a lot like what we've seen across the country in this recent election, and I think it's destroyed the confidence, and I think it's created a racket. I mean, an absolute racket, and the sad thing is, it shouldn't be that hard, Brenda, when it comes to casting your vote, when it comes to the very heart of our democratic process and this great constitutional republic, and a basic right to be exercised in casting your vote. You should be able to go to the polls if you're physically able, and you should be able to authenticate your signature, verify your identity, and this universal mail-in system. In Virginia and other states that had this universal mail-in, people could go through they could just fill out these ballots by using a phone book and mail them in, and then they could be received days after the election. It's a sad day in our country that we've allowed it to get to this. Now, I'll say this. If there's any evidence of that, we know there's games being played, and we know people have taken advantage of the lax voting laws. But at the same time, the courts are set up to hear it. If they have the evidence, they got to bring it. And because we cannot stay like this forever. If we want our country to succeed and persist, and if we want to have a new day where we can live to fight again for the heart and soul of this country, we cannot be in this posture forever. So I'm with you. I'm just as concerned. But I'm also encouraged by the fact that we have 14 new Republicans in the United States House, and I believe we're going to get the House back from Pelosi in 2022. And I think it's because she did nothing besides, there may be one or two things, but it was obstruct this president, prevent him from doing anything that he could take any credit for, even if it hurt the country. Radical policies, socialist policies like the Green New Deal and single-payer health care systems and open borders, and it's not me making it up. They put it on paper, and they tried to pass it through the House. I'll tell you a recent one. This is one that y'all hadn't asked about. Did y'all know that we're sitting here trying to give businesses a chance to succeed and survive this pandemic and the government policies that have set them back? We're trying to get assistance to families that are living paycheck to paycheck, and they can't have both go to work now because their children are home because their schools are shut down. You know what Speaker Pelosi teed up as a priority last week when we hadn't even done this part of our business, helping our fellow Americans through this crisis? She put a bill on the floor to legalize marijuana, to subsidize marijuana retail businesses to open up and expunge the record of people who've been convicted of breaking the law with respect to marijuana, including selling marijuana in our neighborhoods. Now, I'm against legalization of marijuana. Some people want the states to make that choice. I vote for things that I think will strengthen the family, strengthen the fabric of our country, strengthen our communities, and make us safer, stronger, and freer. I don't think allowing another mind-altering substance to be freely traded in our neighborhoods is a good idea for this country. So I oppose it. But I can't believe the audacity that Speaker Pelosi and the Democrat leadership would actually think that that's a good idea in the middle of all we're trying to do to help our fellow Americans. I'm shocked, and it tells me a lot about California politics. You can go the way of California, or you can put policies in place like we have in Texas. I think the results speak for themselves. No other state is getting more businesses and more families to move to their state on account of the quality of life and the climate to do business and make a living than the great state of Texas. So how about we make America more like Texas, and we keep it great, and that's what I'm going to do in this next term. I know we've gone a little late. There are lots of things we can do this coming year and session. We're working on rural health care issues. I think we're actually going to get some things done by year end to help make sure that my friends in rural America have access to basic care. We're going to expand on what President Trump did to put America first in trade policies, USMCA, China trade deal, Japan trade deal, etc. We're going to restructure our supply chain so that we're not dependent on China. And we're going to do everything in our power. And I'm going to work every day. I spoke to the entire Republican conference this morning about this. We've got to rein in the spending. We've got to reduce our debt, or it's going to be the next big crisis, and we're going to just push it off on our kids. Do y'all know we're spending more money on the interest to service the debt? Not the debt itself, but the interest payments are now close to $500 billion, and in less than 10 years, they'll be more than what we spend on national defense. You want to know what will bring America down and rob us of our exceptionalism? Well, China's a threat, and other things y'all have mentioned, and we hadn't even talked about Section 230 and censorship by big tech, but our inability to govern and to manage our fiscal affairs like every other American has to is going to be a disaster, and it's a looming crisis, and I hope I can do something to stave it off. Hey, God bless y'all for staying with me. Merry Christmas, and can't wait to get back home to see my family and to be with you all through the Christmas holiday. Go West